Regarding bringing meritocracy into the economy, because like I was saying at the beginning of the show, Jordan Peterson mentions, you see it throughout culture, except in economy, because ultimately wealthy people transfer wealth to kids that aren't necessarily intelligent or valuable, but they're super. I think
valuable.
Yeah, valuable to society is what I mean. They're more of a drain than a plus. But what I think we can do is create a system where everyone can have their own cryptocurrency. I've talked about this before, and then you can. If you want to like subscribe to my channel for $10 a month, cool. But if you want to pay me an Ian coin, I'll give you a 10% discount. So I generate desire for my token. And so we've created almost like a meritocratic economy where there's all these different currencies, and the valuable ones are the ones that give you the most utility.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think crypto is interesting. There was a huge crypto revolution, 2017, 2018. Everybody thought all of their cryptocurrencies were going to go and be great, but actually Pareto rule, only one or two of them really ended up skyrocketing. It was Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Yeah, but if you bought Dogecoin back when it came out, man, you got rich. There's like one dude who's a millionaire now of Dogecoin.
I'm not too worried about the actual dollar value, because in a system like that, there would be no like central currency that everything is like valued at. It would just, they would all have value based on the individual.
Well, the reason why we have a single currency money economy is to facilitate transactions, just to make it a lot easier.
Wouldn't it be easier for the world if everyone had a one world currency?
Yeah, that sounds like globalization.
Yeah. Why wouldn't it happen? Look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin's used by everybody around the world.
It's true.
So I don't know if Bitcoin will ever be hard currency, but we're certainly moving towards a future where some crypto will be. And maybe that's kind of the point. Maybe the Titanic hit that in 2008. When did Bitcoin come out, Ian?
2008? 2009?
2009, right?
Wow.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So somebody saw it and was like, we need some. I mean, look, I'm not saying conspiracy. I'm saying the crisis happens, and this Satoshi dude or whoever, whether it's a multiple people or not, was like, that's a problem. We need sound currency. Bitcoin. Boom. So now what happens? It's just dominoes falling over, man. We start seeing economic crisis, economic collapse. The government is full of a bunch of Benny Hill type stooge cops running around with holding their hats frantically trying to figure out what's going on. And it's all melting down. And then in the end, what happens? Everybody in the world uses one thing, Bitcoin or like some crypto.
We're in a position now as the United States where we have the power. It's kind of like George Washington when he was president. He had the power. They wanted him to become a king. They want the United States to stay the power, but like we have a responsibility, just as Washington did, to give that power away, to step down. And I think now we're in the position to create a world economy that, with all these different types of currencies that intermingle and intercorrelate.
Yeah, you know what, man? I would love for there to be some kind of system, global system, that defends freedom, protects sovereign borders, but still allows us to avoid war and function in a unified manner in a certain sense.
Wait, hold on. Global system that protects freedom. How could a system which is by nature organized and therefore has to suppress some freedom or to gain organization also protect freedom?
Like a Bill of Rights, a system based around a core of ideologies that says, in order to violate a person's rights, there must be due process. So we have organized a system in the U.S. Not perfect, but pretty good. Now, there's a lot of places in the world that don't have that. I'm not suggesting we go with force and kick their doors in and then staple constitutions to their walls. But it would be awesome if whatever ends up happening with mass communications, we don't end up with a Chinese communist style overarching global authority. We end up with a classically liberal, we respect, if you live in the United States, then you are allowed to set the laws for the United States. However, no war. International agreements on not having war, not stealing resources. You know, there's got to be something. I'll tell you this. There's that famous quote that I think it was from one of the Rothschilds. I'm not entirely sure. You would probably know, where he said that it's not that what do you say? Globalization will happen whether anybody wants it to or not, or something like that. And a lot of people I know, a lot of libertarians and ANCAPs, think he was, you know, twirling his mustache going, globalization will happen. When in reality he was saying, like, the way the world is going with communications and trade, we will eventually have a one world government. The goal, I suppose, is the United States and those who live in it should be able to have their rights respected within their own borders. They should have their constitutional freedoms and rights. They shouldn't be banned or censored or shut down. But there could be international agreements on what happens in the event of conflict, of war, of territorial disputes. So we can get to that point. We can have a system. We already do have a system by which we have an international currency. It's called Visa and MasterCard. I can go to any country in the world with my card and swipe and buy what I want. It's so easy.
The SWIFT payment system. That's the global SWIFT payment system.
Because I'll tell you, man, I've been watching a lot of Stargate SG-1, and you know one of the biggest problems is and I'm not talking about the fiction of the show. I'm talking about the writers perceived when they're making the show.
Right.
Is that when they encounter other worlds and try to negotiate, they say you can't negotiate on the behalf of your people. You if we give you weapons or utility, you'll go to war and you'll destroy yourselves. Mm-hmm. So we need to have some kind of we need to have a way to prevent World War III or whatever. Now, of course, there are powerful global interests, elites, who desperately want a one world authority. The only problem is they're crackpot authoritarians who would burn your life to the ground and they don't care about you as an individual. They care about the numbers, the utilitarianism. That's a nightmarish world to live in. That's what the Chinese Communist Party does. So I'm saying we don't want that.
Okay, but let me give you a different perspective. Our founding fathers were authoritarians. Because
they were authoritarians?
Well, this is what I mean. I mean that we gave them authoritarian power to write our Constitution. Like, at one point in time in the U.S. history, we had an authoritarian government because those people were the ones who eventually came together and then they created the constitutional system that now protects freedom. But in order to do that, we had to trust them with the ability to make a constitution and a bill of rights, and then to actually execute on that, at least for the first few years.
But they didn't just they didn't just write a constitution and staple it to a wall and say, this is what you have to deal with. It was actually extremely difficult. In order to actually get the constitution, they were going to states and negotiating, and the states were like, bug off. We don't care. We don't want this. And it was actually very, very difficult. It took, I think, over like 15 or 20 years to finally get states to actually vote for and sign on to the constitutional system.
It did, but we still trusted them to make the initial creative effort. Now, we had the ability to provide a backlash against that, but again, we had George Washington could have been king. Like, he could have been a president. So he had to actually step down and say, okay, I'm not actually going to do that. Other people,
well, that just shows we didn't have the authoritarian rule.
Right, and that system was still being developed at that time, and there were people who exercised sort of authoritarian influence, like in Marbury versus Madison. Judicial branch was not granted the ability for judicial review at the time. They gave themselves the ability for judicial review in Marbury versus Madison. So they kind of had a little bit of a, we're going to get some power. Nobody gave them the ability to do that, but they did. So,
but are some instances of authority being exercised in bad ways indicative of the entire system being authoritarian at some point?
I would say yes. You have totalitarian authoritarians, which are very dangerous, where like the author of the Constitution is the authoritarian. I mean, it's the exact same word, authoritarian. No. Yeah, that's the root of the word authoritarian is author. And they,
right.
They
but your
penned
authoritarian is a system defined by an authority that commands on down versus liberty, a liberty-based system, a weaker centralized power structure.
I think there's never it's never all or none. You always have aspects of authority within any given system, a family unit, a government, a democratic.
If you go all the way to the top of the political compass to authoritarian, you've got a guy who's beating the peasants to death and holding people at gunpoint to steal their stuff.
Excessive authoritarianism.
If you go, that's the epitome of authoritarian. If you go all the way to the bottom, you get anarchy, and it's where either you have free trade anarchy, where it's ANCAPs, or you have anarcho-syndicalism or communism, where people are sitting around and basking in the glories of their labor, which is utopian to be completely honest.
That's like a lack of authority.
Or a tribe. The easiest way, right? Anarchy means without authority. So if you go all the way to the bottom with anarchy, you can literally have a small tribe of people who agree to share things and don't really ever think about money. Or you can have free market capitalists that are just like, hey, the market dictates. So just because somebody says, I should have the ability to, there's somebody who says, I'm writing this constitution and this is what I think we should do, doesn't mean the system is authoritarian. They're like, so we can either, it's a gradient. Okay, you could be 60% libertarian with 40% authoritarian. Right. You can be, any number.
Well, you know what Thomas Hobbes says about that.
What does he say?
I mean, he says the function of a government is to hold people at gunpoint. They have the function of government has the power to hold somebody at gunpoint and demand things from them. That he said, even we have this. He would say, we have this veneer of liberalism right now where we give the people the illusion, the ability that they have, rights and sincere voting power. But really, who has the ability to coerce you? It's the government.
Yeah,
it's true, but
And so in that sense, it's authoritarian.
Just
That's what I
because
mean.
there
Go
are
ahead.
rules doesn't mean we're an authoritarian government. Because
Right.
the one thing about the United States is, and this is a lesson conservatives should have learned a while ago, you're allowed to speak, for the most part, and use that ability to build culture. Now, there are confines in the Overton window. But because many people on the right weren't actively building culture, they were chasing after it, constantly defending from what the left wanted. The left owns the narrative. In the United States, we have an authoritarian culture that is taking over. We still have some libertarian aspects within it. And if we don't stop the authoritarian encroachment, it goes into government, which it is with what Joe Biden is doing. And this is something I was talking about 4 or 5 years ago. And now here we are where we're dangerously close to the government absorbing authoritarian cultural aspects and the people who oppose it being too fractured to do anything about it. What I mean to say is, for the longest time, the United States was not authoritarian in that you could absolutely have your, crackpot free speech group going around saying crazy things, and even have the ACLU defend you as you marched through Skokie, Illinois, with saying horribly anti-Semitic things.
But that was because we authoritatively decided you could do that by saying, if you're going to stop them from doing that, we're going to arrest you. So they have freedom. That's the authoritarian aspect of our government.
But you misunderstand what authoritarian means.
You think
right?
so?
Yeah, a cop who says, I can't arrest a guy for speaking is not an authoritarian. A cop who says, I can arrest you if you try to physically harm that person is still not an authoritarian.
Oh, I think they are authoritarian. I mean, police by nature are authoritarian. They are the author of law.
Yeah,
or they're
but
at least the arm of the author.
They're an
Right.
authority. I think you misunderstand authoritarian, which is a government system of a top-down authority and centralized
then
powers.
I would argue that saying the big A authoritarian is a misnomer, that you really can't say a government
you're just
is or
confusing-
isn't.
you're
There's
confusing
always
authority.
it's always a gradient of authority
Yes.
within a government.
So you're confusing the word authority with authoritarian. So the police are constrained by the public in many, many ways. Now the cops can do bad things. They can seize your guns and smile with a smile on their face when they do it. They will kick grandma in the teeth to enforce these lockdowns. So we're entering that period. That's what I'm saying. We are entering an authoritarian government because it starts with the culture and moves in, and nothing was done to stop it.
But in the 60s,
however,
we had civil rights where they
won.
They integrated the schools with authoritarianism. They went in with guns in their arms and said, this school is now integrated.
But that wasn't because a king or a centralized command structure made it so.
It was the president.
Didn't the president?
issued
Yeah, it was, yes. And it was because of mandate from the public.
True. Yeah,
And
we are
so-
our own author in that system.
So you're confusing authoritarian.
Well, maybe it's the totalitarian, which is the extreme authoritarianism, is actually totalitarianism.
If you've got a house with 10 people in it and 6 people demand pepperoni, on their pizza, and 4 demand pineapple.
No.
Yeah.
All right.
Is it authoritarian when the 6 people are like, we're ordering pepperoni? No, it's a democratic vote. Now, democracy can be tyranny of the majority, but there's a big difference between a centralized hierarchical command structure of authority that dictates everyone has to do something and no one can do anything about it, and a group of people coming out voicing their opinion and the system changing in response to the will of the people.
When you have one person issuing the authority, it's very dangerous. But when you have a group able to do it, it's called democracy.
So to clarify too, there can be cult authoritarianism for sure. Everybody marching to dogma and just reacting in a certain way, and that's Black Lives Matter and critical race theory and critical race applied principles. But when that goes into government, you end up with dictatorial presidents screaming at the top of their lungs, threatening people and using those powers against their perceived enemies, and that's when your government becomes authoritarian.
Okay, it's interesting.
I'm
I want to go back to your pizza example for a second. I think it's interesting. So the group decides. So 6 people. There are 10 people. 6 people decide on pepperoni. 4 people decide on pineapple. But someone still has to make the call to Domino's and say, okay, we're getting pepperoni pizza.
Yep.
Now, that person may say, I have the mandate to call Domino's because we have the majority who said they want pepperoni, so I'm going to call pepperoni. But what if somebody on the pineapple side was like, well, no, you don't have the mandate because we want to make it unanimous. And you're like, well, no, I think it's majority rule. And at that point, it's actually, I could see it be the person who calls the pepperoni is just actually just asserting his power over the other 10 people.
Did you agree to the rules?
I don't know. Did they?
Yes. I mean, we've long had a structure in place of like, here's how we'll have the vote. Here, good sir, and we shake hands. These are the rules for the game in terms of how we make decisions. Then 4 people start screaming, it's not fair, it's not fair. It's what you get with 2016. They all agreed to the rules of the election and then screamed all these horrible things about Donald Trump. When it came to the 2020 election, a bunch of Republicans and Democrats started changing voter rules in many states, which resulted in a major lawsuit by Texas, which is very, very different, which is I can understand why many of the Trump supporters are angry about it, among other things. So the issue is, if you and I agree, we're going to arm wrestle and the winner gets to choose what topping we put on our pizza and you lose, you can't then claim, well, you don't have the mandate. That's authoritarian. I'm like, bro, we agree to this.
Right.
We agreed to a sorting mechanism by which we decide how things are made. Just because we have to make hard decisions and someone has to be the one to do it doesn't mean that it's an authoritarian system.
Yeah.
If Black Lives Matter gains power because of their cult ideology, they will have the ability to enforce this because they have a bunch of zealots who go around smashing windows and beating people. But there will be one person who exercises the authority and dictates to their cult to go and take action. Then the will of the people doesn't matter anymore. So you look at Cuba. Most people did not want communism. They did not want a dictatorship. But they were tricked and manipulated, and the revolutionary forces of Castro had the ability to take whatever they wanted. People resisted. There was no agreement to that. That was authoritarian. No one voted for him to do this. Well, actually, I don't know exactly if maybe they had a faux vote, but I'm pretty sure the elections never came. That's what Jose was saying. The Constitution never came. The election never came. And before we knew it, Castro was just the dictator who controlled everything. That's where we're going, thanks to critical race theory and the elimination of meritocracy. The idea is you cut off the tall grass, you take away anyone's ability to challenge you, and you mandate things based on seemingly random characteristics. And then that's another way. That's probably the one of the surefire ways towards authoritarianism. With a meritocratic system, it's not as easy to have authoritarianism, but you can, right? With a meritocratic system, you can get let's just call it a free market system. Yeah. Over time, monopolies form, power develops, and you get the East India Trading Company. No regulation, the wealthiest, most powerful company that ever existed. And they can do what they want, set up cities, enslave people, attack people. With centralization, with leftist ideology, with things like critical race theory, you use ideology and you just centralize authority immediately. So instead of taking a long amount of time to earn your position, they assert it by force.
Right. I mean, this is the premise of my book, an Inconvenient Minority. So, critical race theorists, they actually, it's funny the way we talk about critical race theorists, because you need to realize that critical race theorists use race as a marketing tool. They use race as a marketing tool to get people of that race to support them, to value them, to buy their books, to vote for them, everything like that. Race is a marketing tool. That's at this stage of things. It's a marketing tool for the purpose of eventual oppression, because if you can convince somebody that their race is what matters to you, and race is a set of characteristics that involves not acting white or this kind of thing, then you can convince them to do things based on things that they wouldn't otherwise have chosen to do because you've appealed to a racial identity.
Well, there's another component to the critical race theory stuff, and it's the riots. That's their physical enforcement. If you don't agree with them, they smash your window. Yeah. So what do we see? In places like Berkeley, people in their windows, they put up Black Lives Matter signs. The signs don't actually mean they support Black Lives Matter. The signs actually mean, please don't hurt me.
Yeah, I think that Kenny is making the extremely salient point that at the end of the day, the bottom line is the question of who decides. And this is the issue of censorship. Who decides what is misinformation? Who decides whether Joe Biden should be taken off YouTube? And Joe Biden mentioned this a little while ago. He's like, it's not so much about the votes as who counts the votes. That is the person who decides who's going to be in power. It's the person who calls the shots.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.